Today, we're going to talk through PSA pop controls and whether or not PSA has better standards these days, whether or not they're grading easier or harder. Now, this is something that I've been thinking about for quite some time, but it was kickstarted off of this video, which we spoke about yesterday, relating to, Jason Koons, founder, owner of ISA Grading. Now, we touched on some of the really cool talking points on this one already, but what was very interesting in this was that, myself and a few other people asked questions in the comments around, okay, do we think PSA is grading tough? And Jason basically said, I think we are in a tough era right now within PSA. And I think he basically had the belief that there is some form of pop control going on out at PSA as well. Now, my response to this was an interesting one because my question went to, okay, well, how much of, PSA grading tough these days? Because you've seen lots of videos on the internet where people are getting, 6s and 7s for cards that should be 9s or 10s. Is them grading tough or is them grading inexperienced, right? And Jason talked to, PSA bringing in so many more graders, right? So you have to cut them some slack because it takes time to train people. Like, that statement does not sit well with me, right? Because as I've touched on before, you as a business, should not be dropping your standards just because you have inexperienced people on board, right? You should not be grading as many cards as you're grading, today, as you did yesterday when you've got 100 new staff, as an example, right? Because you need to train those people. You need to make sure that, your risks, your policies, the things they're doing meet your expectations, your standards as a business. And I don't see those errors that PSA are making. And I say errors because you see countless videos on social media. You see countless posts, again, on social media where people say, why did this card get a 6 or 7? What the heck is going on? That is not PSA grading tough, in my opinion. That's them being incredibly inconsistent, and there are two distinct things. And I want to clarify a few things. So if we go to gem rate right now on screen, you can see the gem rate for April 2023, and currently it's about 47% for sports cards and 71% for TCG cards. And as it states over here, gem rates include PSA 10, SGC 10, and pristine Beckett 9.5 or greater. So basically these are PSA 10s. So if it's a 2020s era card, or even, 2000s or 2010s, I should say, it's a 45% chance roughly, of getting, a PSA 10. A lot higher for TCG is not overly surprising given they're manufactured, fairly well these days. The interesting thing then would be to jump, back a few years to see, or months, I should say, what's the trend been like over that period. And you can sort of see here, October 22, it's about 55%. Gem rate did not split between TCG or non-TCG, but essentially the average of these two is essentially the same number as that. So since at least October last year, they're remaining fairly consistent. The scary thing though is if you go to the same period, in April of last year, which I think is before they opened their, new operations and expanded to having more graders, it was at, 28%. So, on face value, that looks like it's getting easier, not harder to get good grades out of PSA. Now, I know that's a very small population. It's a hard thing to infer and all those kinds of things, but, it goes to what I'm trying to talk to here. And I'm really keen to get your thoughts on this down in the comments below because, in an era where you've got, so many more collectors, the second they open their packs, they're putting those cards in penny sleeves and top loaders, or they're going into breaks and these cards are literally going straight to the graders. You would think that inherently there's going to be a higher chance for these cards to grade better than what they have in the past. And this is even, discounting the fact that we have huge QC issues right now within the manufacturing process, right? There are so many cards printed that it almost washes away the QC issues because people are no longer submitting cards, to PSA that they maybe shouldn't have. And that could go to the 28% that you're seeing in April of last year, where you could say, well, maybe people were submitting cards, back then that they shouldn't have, which might be the case. But I think the general gist of the whole situation and my general thought process is that, it's not PSA grading harder. It's not PSA grading easier. It's PSA grading incredibly inconsistently. And Jason in that interview talked to, those periods, over the last 30 years where PSA grades really tough, really easy, really tough, really easy. And all graders go through that process, right? As they sort of adapt to new trends within the hobby, new product, policies, and procedures in place at their business as people leave, new people come in. That stuff is really fair. But I think the situation we're in right now has nothing to do with them grading tough or grading easy. I think it comes down to them being incredibly, inconsistent and, mainly focused in on pumping through as many cards out the door as possible. Now, you could go back to my point earlier where I talked about how, people posting on social media showing all these inconsistencies with the grading, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, forums, YouTube videos, And you could say that's just, the vocal minority complaining, right? It's always the unhappy customers are the ones that are posting things. But I don't think that flies in this day and age where you've got so many people that are, showcasing their collections through all these forms of social media. I don't think it's just, a vocal minority. I don't think it's just the disgruntled customers. It seems to be, fairly pervasive. And you also see issues where, the same card might get submitted multiple times. You get drastically different grades every single time. I'll say it once again. I do not believe PSA is grading tough. I do not believe PSA is grading easy. Maybe they are to an extent. The bigger problem is how inconsistent they are and how incredibly poor they've been from a business to try and expand their operations the way that they have. And that's a really good thing to do as a business, right? You want to grow. You want to generate more revenue, which creates more, value for us as customers, as I say all the time. But you need to go about it the right way. You can't say, Jason, that you've got all these people coming on board, so it's okay that it takes time to train people how to be graders. It's like, no, mate. You got to be consistent. You got to give people their money's worth, right? When you've got these mistakes that PSA are making and they still charge, you as a customer, they still want to upcharge. It's a complete joke. And I'm sure many of you, will agree down in the comments below. So I'm really keen to get your thoughts on that one. As I touched on at the very start, the other thing I want to quickly talk to is the whole pop control element that, Jason also flagged in this thing. And it's also something that many others have talked about in recent weeks, including Sports Car Radio and a few others as well. There seems to be a trend where people are suggesting that PSA is implementing pop control. And, based on the things you're saying, it's entirely possible, right? And the thing I wanted to talk to on this is it's something that I've always found, really interesting because I flagged this in the Sports Cup live stream that Jason actually responded to me on because I made the comparison to the whole comic book industry. And for the regulars of the channel will know I've talked to this before, where you've got, CGC Comics, having this, trend or this view that people have of them that they are incentivizing people to grade comic books these days by handing out, more 9.6s, more 9.8s, more 9.4s. Whereas back in the day, they were very, very tough. So they didn't do that, right? They took their grading very seriously. And this got to the point where you literally have, old school comic book collectors that will pay a significant premium on books graded in the early 2000s in a 9.0 grade and pay more for that book than the equivalent today, but in a 9.8 grade, right? So the same, Avengers #1, they're going to pay a premium for that 9.0 years ago as opposed to that 9.6 today. Purely because they feel that, CGC are far too slack these days, but not because their grading standards have become easier, but because they just simply want to incentivize people to grade more books, right? They want to get that revenue coming through, so they want to give everyone high grades, right? They're not grading easily, they're just being incredibly slack with their whole process. And there's a pretty cool guy, Cougar Comics. Some of you guys may have seen him before, but very small channel, pretty cool dude that talks to this all the time, an older gentleman. I don't think he's made videos recently, but I used to watch him a crap ton back in the day. But when I asked that question to Jason, his response came back to the things we just touched on, where PSA is grading tough these days, which is why you're seeing it. I just think it's a very interesting situation where, if they are implementing some form of pop control, I don't think it has anything to do with them grading tough or easy, like I alluded to a little bit earlier. I think it goes to the things that Sports Car Radio talked about recently with the whole, card trimming situation, where you as the average Joe submitting cards gets flagged as trimmed, but some influential people within the hobby that, actually have trimmed cards get the, tick of approval, the seal of approval, and say, you know what, we're going to grade this. I think it's the same kind of thing. And I think, the pop control is probably, in place in that kind of, capacity where things like that are happening. So therefore the pop control is happening. It was also interesting just to see how confident Jason was and how confident Evan Mathis was in the comments and in the live stream itself on saying that PSA is implementing pop control. I'm really keen to get your thoughts on this down in the comments below. I just want to reiterate once again, I don't think it's happening from the perspective that it's controlled in the sense that they're grading a lot tougher these days. I just think it's, incredibly inconsistent, like we touched on at the start, and them implementing pop control is mainly to favor certain individuals rather than their grading standards being slack. I just think they're two distinct things. They're grading incredibly inconsistently, but then they're also maybe implementing some form of pop control. So really keen to get your thoughts on this as well, because I thought it was, a very interesting comment from Jason, and he seemed to be incredibly confident with that statement. So I'm not sure if he has some inside information or anything like that. Just based on, the people he's connected with, based on stories about him in the past, I would say he knows a heck of a lot about this industry. He's a very wealthy individual, been a part of the game for a long, long time. He has lots of stories. I'm sure there is a lot of truth to some of the things that he's alluding to. So, as I said in the video the other day, check out that live stream if you haven't seen it. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and I will, see you in the next one. Cheers.